The night Daniel finally became successful, he realized something terrifying. There was no one to call, no best friend to celebrate with, no partner waiting at home, no message that meant something real. Just a quiet phone screen and a corner office overlooking an entire city. For 22 years, Daniel had worked for this moment. Long nights, missed birthdays, canceled plans, relationships slowly fading into the background, all for one goal: success. And eventually, he got everything he had ever wanted. The promotion, the title, the salary most people only dream about. But sitting alone in that beautiful office, looking at a phone that wasn't ringing, Daniel realized something he had been too busy to notice for 2 decades. The life he worked so hard to build had quietly pushed everyone else out of it. And for the first time in 22 years, he asked himself a question he had never dared to ask before. If this is success, why does it feel like I lost something? Welcome to Good Stories Today, your channel for emotional and inspiring stories. Listen while you drive, work, or simply seek inspiration. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Disclaimer: this video contains AI-generated content for educational and entertainment purposes. This is the story of the day success stopped feeling like success, and how sometimes the life we spend decades building is the one that slowly takes us away from ourselves. Chapter 1. The Long Climb. Daniel wasn't born into opportunity. His father worked long shifts at a factory in Ohio, came home exhausted every night, fell asleep in front of the TV. His mother cleaned office buildings at night, left when Daniel went to bed, came home when he woke up. They weren't poor, but they were tired. Always tired. And Daniel learned one thing very early. If you wanted a better life, you had to earn it. Nobody was going to hand you anything. So he studied harder than everyone else. While his friends were out on Friday nights, Daniel was at the library. While they slept in on weekends, he was working part-time jobs. While they took spring break trips, he was applying for scholarships. He graduated top of his class, got a full ride to a state university, majored in business, networked relentlessly, landed an internship at a mid-sized consulting firm his junior year, and never looked back. By 25, he was a junior analyst. By 28, a senior analyst. By 32, a manager. By 37, a director. And now, at 47, senior vice president. The trajectory was clean, linear, impressive. Everything he had worked for. But somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing what he was leaving behind. Chapter 2. The Quiet Sacrifices. At first, the sacrifices felt small, necessary, temporary. A canceled dinner with friends because a client needed something last minute. Sorry guys, next time. A missed birthday party for his college roommate because he had a presentation the next day. I'll make it up to you. A weekend spent finishing reports instead of going to his cousin's wedding. Family will understand. Daniel told himself the same thing every ambitious person says. Just for now. Things will slow down once I get promoted. Once I reach the next level, I'll have more control. But the next level always required more. More responsibility, more hours, more sacrifice, more proof that you could handle it. He dated a woman named Sarah in his early 30s. She was patient, understanding, supportive. For 2 years, she worked around his schedule, late dinners, canceled plans, weekends alone while he worked, until one night she sat across from him at a restaurant and said, "Daniel, I feel like I'm dating your calendar, not you." "I know, I'm sorry. It's just crazy right now. It's always crazy, and I don't think it's going to change." She was right. They broke up 3 weeks later, and Daniel threw himself into work even harder. Because at least work was predictable, at least work rewarded effort. Friendships slowly faded. His college friends stopped inviting him to things. Not out of anger, just practicality. Why invite someone who always says no? The group chat he used to be active in went quiet. He'd see photos sometimes, everyone together, laughing, and he'd think, I should reach out. But he never did, because he was busy, always busy. Family conversations became shorter. His mom would call every Sunday. "How are you, honey?" "Good, Mom. Busy." "You're always busy." "I know. But it'll pay off." She stopped asking when he'd visit. She knew the answer. But Daniel didn't notice. Because success was getting closer, he could feel it, just a little more, just a little longer. And then he'd have time for everything else. Chapter 3. The Promotion. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. Subject line, Executive Promotion Announcement. Daniel was in a meeting when it came through. He felt his phone buzz, glanced at the subject line. His heart skipped. He waited until the meeting ended, walked calmly back to his desk, opened the email. "Dear Daniel, we are pleased to announce your promotion to Senior Vice President." He read it 3 times. 22 years, hundreds of late nights, thousands of sacrifices, and finally, he'd made it. His co-workers congratulated him. Messages filled his phone from people at the company. "Congrats. Well deserved." About time. The company organized a small celebration in the conference room. Cake, champagne, handshakes. Everyone said the same thing. "You deserve this." And Daniel believed them. That evening, after everyone left, he walked into his new office for the first time. Large windows overlooking the city, a mahogany desk, shelves waiting to be filled, a quiet space that symbolized everything he had achieved. He stood at the window, looked out at the skyline, the lights of the city stretching endlessly in every direction. This was it. The view he'd imagined for years, the office he'd dreamed about, the moment he'd worked for since he was 25 years old. But when the building finally emptied, when the congratulations faded, when he was alone in that office, Daniel noticed something strange. The silence felt heavier than expected. Chapter 4. The first quiet night for years, Daniel had imagined this moment. He thought he'd feel something: joy, pride, satisfaction, relief, some kind of emotional payoff for 22 years of grinding. But sitting alone in that office, he realized something unsettling. There was no one he felt like calling, no close friend to celebrate with, no partner waiting at home with champagne, no one who had shared the long journey with him, no one who understood what this moment meant or what it had cost. Sarah was married now. He'd seen it on Facebook 2 years ago. Beautiful wedding photos. She looked happy. She'd married someone who probably remembered her birthday without a calendar reminder. His college friends had families now, kids in Little League, weekend barbecues, lives that moved forward while Daniel stayed late at the office. Routines that didn't include him, not because they didn't care, but because he'd stopped being part of their world years ago. His parents would be happy for him. His mom would cry with pride. His dad would say, "That's my boy." But they were asleep. It was 9 p.m. on the West Coast. They went to bed at 8:30. He could call tomorrow, tell them then. But even that felt hollow, because they didn't really understand what his job was, what a senior vice president did, what it meant in his world. To them, he just worked at a company, and that was okay. But it meant this victory was his alone. His phone sat quietly on the mahogany desk. A few more congratulatory texts from coworkers, people he saw in meetings but never grabbed lunch with, people who knew his work persona but not his actual person. "Congrats, Daniel. Well deserved. Let's grab drinks to celebrate." But none of them would actually follow through. It was just what you say when someone gets promoted. And for the first time in decades, Daniel wasn't busy. He had nowhere to be. No emails demanding immediate responses, no deadlines looming, no fires to put out, no one needing him for anything. He was just alone. He walked to the window, looked out at the city below. Thousands of lit windows, thousands of lives happening in parallel. People having dinner with their families, couples watching TV on the couch, friends playing video games together, kids doing homework at kitchen tables. Normal, simple, connected. And Daniel was here, in a corner office on the 32nd floor, with everything he'd worked for, and no one to share it with. He sat in his new chair, expensive leather, ergonomic, the kind reserved for executives, looked around the empty office, at the shelves waiting to be filled with books he'd never read, at the desk big enough to spread out projects he'd work on alone, at the view of a city he lived in but didn't really experience, and thought, this is it? This is what I worked for? 22 years of 60-hour weeks for this? He'd expected the promotion to feel like a destination, like he'd finally arrived, like crossing a finish line after a marathon. But instead, it felt like he'd just realized how far he'd wandered from where he started, from who he started as. Daniel sat there for another hour. In the dark, office lights dimmed automatically at 9 p.m. to save energy. Just him and the city lights reflecting off the windows, and he asked himself a question he'd been too busy to ask for 2 decades. Was it worth it? He didn't have an answer. Chapter 5. A question he couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, Daniel noticed something changing inside him. The job was exactly what he had worked for. The responsibility, the recognition, the salary, $320,000 a year. More money than his parents made in a decade. But the excitement he expected never arrived. Instead, a quiet question followed him everywhere. During meetings, during late nights at the office, during the rare moments when he walked home in silence. The question was simple, but it was impossible to ignore. Who am I without this job? He thought about it at his desk, sitting in that corner office, looking at the city below. If you took away the title, the salary, the reputation, who was Daniel? He couldn't answer, because for 22 years, he had been his work. His identity was his career. His worth was his productivity. His value was his output. But as a person, as a human being with interests, hobbies, relationships, he didn't know who that was anymore. He used to play guitar, hadn't touched one in 15 years. He used to love hiking, couldn't remember the last time he'd been on a trail. He used to read for pleasure. Now he only read business books and reports. Everything that made him had been slowly replaced by work, and he hadn't even noticed. Chapter 6. The Moment of Clarity. One evening, while leaving the office late, around 9 p.m. on a Thursday, Daniel passed a small cafe near the building. He'd walked past it 1,000 times, never really looked at it, but that night, something made him stop. Inside, people were talking, laughing, sharing meals, friends catching up after work, a couple holding hands across the table, a group celebrating someone's birthday, a life happening outside the walls of ambition. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching through the glass, and suddenly, he understood something. For years, he had been building a successful career, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped building a life. He'd traded everything for this. Friendships for promotions, relationships for raises, experiences for achievements. And now, standing outside that cafe, looking at people who seemed genuinely happy, he wondered if it had been worth it. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, hundreds of names, colleagues, clients, professional connections, but how many of them actually knew him? How many would he call if he needed someone to talk to? None. Maybe 1 or 2. But even then, would they pick up? He put his phone away, walked home, and sat alone in his apartment. A beautiful 1-bedroom in a high-rise building he barely spent time in. And for the first time in his adult life, Daniel felt the weight of what he'd given up. Chapter 7. Redefining Success. The realization didn't lead to a dramatic decision. Daniel didn't quit his job. He didn't sell everything and move to a beach in Costa Rica. He didn't have some midlife crisis and buy a red Porsche. He didn't do any of the cliché things people do when they realize their life feels empty. But something quietly changed inside him, a shift. Subtle but significant. He started leaving the office at 6 p.m. Not every day, but some days. Tuesdays and Thursdays at first, then Mondays too. At first, it felt wrong, uncomfortable, like he was slacking, like everyone was watching him leave and judging him. But nobody cared. His work still got done. His team still hit their targets. The project still moved forward, and the world didn't end. He began reaching out to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Started with his college roommate Mike, found him on LinkedIn, sent a message. "Hey man, I know it's been forever. Want to grab coffee?" Mike responded within an hour. "Daniel, hell yeah. I thought you fell off the planet." They met the following Saturday at a cafe in Mike's neighborhood. It was awkward at first. They didn't know what to say. 20 years of silence is hard to fill, but after an hour, they were laughing about old stories. The terrible apartment they shared junior year, the road trip to Vegas that ended with a flat tire in the desert, the time they tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner and almost burned down the kitchen. And Mike said something that stuck with Daniel. "Man, I missed you. Where have you been?" "Working." "Yeah, I figured. You always were the ambitious one." "Maybe too ambitious." Mike shrugged. It's never too late to change course. He called his mom more often. Not just the obligatory Sunday check-in where he half listened while checking emails. Real conversations. About nothing important. About everything important. She told him about her garden, how the tomatoes were doing great this year but the peppers weren't growing. About her book club. They were reading some mystery novel and half the group loved it, half hated it. About her friend Margaret who just got a new hip replacement and was walking again. Small things, ordinary things. Things Daniel would have tuned out before. But now he listened, really listened, and he realized he didn't know any of this. He'd been so focused on his life, his career, his goals, his trajectory, that he'd stopped paying attention to hers. "Mom, when's the last time I visited?" She was quiet for a moment. "Thanksgiving, 2 years ago." "2 years? You're busy, honey. I understand." "That's not an excuse. I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize. I know you're working hard. I'm coming home next month for a long weekend. No work, just time." He could hear her smile through the phone. "I'd like that." He started doing things that had nothing to do with productivity. Things that didn't build his resume or expand his network or advance his career. He went to a guitar shop one Saturday, walked in with no plan, just browsing. Ended up buying a cheap Yamaha acoustic, $200. Nothing fancy. Took it home. Sat in his living room. Tried to remember the chords he'd learned in college. G, C, D, E minor. His fingers hurt. He was terrible. But it felt good. It felt human. Like he was reconnecting with a part of himself he'd forgotten existed. He joined a weekend hiking group he found on Meetup, showed up on a Sunday morning at 7 a.m. to a trailhead outside the city. 12 strangers with backpacks and water bottles. They hiked 6 miles through the mountains, talked, laughed, complained about the hills, and for 4 hours, nobody asked what he did for a living. Nobody cared about his title or his company or his success. They just existed together, breathing fresh air, moving their bodies, being present. At the end, they all went to a diner for breakfast. Pancakes, coffee, stories about their week. And Daniel realized this was connection, not networking, not transactional, not strategic, just people being people. At first, all of it felt uncomfortable, almost unfamiliar, like he was wasting time. His brain kept whispering, "You should be working. You should be productive. This isn't moving you forward." But he pushed through, sat with the discomfort, and slowly, Daniel began to understand something deeper. Success wasn't wrong. Ambition wasn't bad. Work wasn't the enemy. But it had never been meant to be the only thing. It was supposed to be one part of a balanced life, not the whole life. Chapter 8. A different kind of achievement. 6 months later, Daniel still held the same title, the same office, the same responsibilities. But his life felt different, because now success had a different meaning. It wasn't just about promotions, or recognition, or climbing higher. It was about balance, about relationships, about remembering the person behind the ambition, He started measuring success differently, not just by quarterly results, but by how many times he laughed this week, how many real conversations he had, how many moments he felt present instead of distracted, and strangely enough, the success he had chased for 22 years finally started to feel meaningful again, because it wasn't the only thing anymore. It was just one part of a fuller life. Conclusion, reflection. Many people spend years chasing success, long hours, endless effort, sacrifices that feel necessary in the moment. But sometimes, the moment we finally reach the top is the moment we realize something important. Success means very little if we lose ourselves along the way. Daniel learned this the hard way. He got everything he wanted, the title, the office, the salary, but he almost lost everything that mattered. His relationships, his identity, his humanity. The real challenge isn't achieving more, it's remembering why we started in the first place. Because the life we build shouldn't just look successful from the outside. It should feel meaningful from the inside. If you're working towards something right now, if you're sacrificing time, relationships, health for a goal, ask yourself, what am I building toward? And who will I be when I get there? Because success without connection is just achievement, and achievement without meaning is just empty. Daniel still works hard, but now he works with purpose. Not just to climb higher, but to build a life worth living, a life that includes work, but isn't defined by it. This is Good Stories Today, your channel for emotional and inspiring stories. If this story made you pause and reflect, I'd love for you to subscribe. I share stories like this every week. Honest human stories about ambition, identity, and learning that what we chase matters less than who we become along the way. Thanks for listening. And remember, the life you build should feel meaningful, not just look successful. See you in the next story.